Autumn, 31 October 1969. A young couple, an ex-hunter and a geologist, lovers of mountain walks, finally decide, also thanks to the Long Bridge, since 1 November, after months and months of stress, to go for a foot route near the Vigant Abyss, which would last approximately 1 week. During the route, they would stop to bivouac along the road, and then resume the march the following mornings. The journey began really well. Between the sun, the wonderful autumn colors and clean air, the smog of the city had vanished and we could finally breathe well. The walk continued until dusk, when they stopped and the tent was put up. During the night, however, the surrounding situation began to take an unexpected turn. Already at dinner time, they couldn't help notice that there was an unusual silence in the nature surrounding them. Usually, in their old excursions, the evening songs of birds or the last crickets before winter had always been present, but this time nothing. Despite this, they did not care too much and went to sleep to prepare for the next morning. Around 3 in the night, he woke up because he heard some strange noises coming from the brush nearby, like someone's steps in the dry leaves, so he decided to get out of the tent without making any noise, holding his carbine Winchester, who he always carried with him in case of emergency. As soon as he was out, the mysterious sounds disappeared, but the absolute silence of the forest remained. He then started to check the area where he had heard the sound and noticed the presence of several broken branches, as if something large had forced rest on them. Tired and sleepy, he rationally decided that it could be a boar, very common in those areas and which had changed area, not finding the food it needed. So in doing, he decided to go back to the tent to sleep. However, the moment when he opened it, out of the corner of his eye, he saw an abnormous shadow, and turned, he saw that being. It was there in the tightness about 50 meters from the tent, about 2 meters tall with humanoid-like features, completely pale. He watched him without moving, until he opened its jaw and emitted a high-shooting "yeah." In an instant the beast contracted, and with non-human movements began to move in his direction. This made his skin crickle, so the former hunter took the weapon, loaded it, and aimed at the being, exploding 2 shots. In the confusion there were inhuman yelps and screaming of fear from the company, who in the meanwhile woke up scared in an attempt to understand what was happening. That all lasted for approximately 15 seconds. Then the silence, or better, the deeming silence of nothing apart from nature and its noises, as they have always been. All except there was no longer trace of the hunter. The wife came out of the tent and started calling him loudly, wondering, what was that noise outside the tent? Why did I hear shots? Why was no one nearby? So she decided to call the police with her Zwift radio, and luckily they answered. Unfortunately, however, she was told that the patrol would not arrive before 15 minutes from the time of the call, since, unfortunately, they had, that same morning, decided to venture through a road covered with shrubs and little used by vehicle. 3.15 aim after the quarter hour, a flash of headlights hit the walls of the tent, lighting it up, synonymous that the police patrol had arrived on the site. At this point, the woman went out but immediately noticed that it was not a patrol but the forest guard. 2 men get out of the off-road apartment, who first calmed his wife, who appeared quite shaken, and decided to start understanding the dynamics of the event that happened. Immediately they noticed, not a little far from the tent, the 2 cartridges from the shots fired by the hunter, but not only that, they also scratched signs on the damp ground that went into the forest. At this point, the 2 colleagues looked at each other with a suspicious air and nodded. They told the woman that they would soon be going to make an inspection in the direction of the tracks, to search for clues, and that she could have taken refuge in the off-road area. The woman refused. She wanted at all costs to know where her companion of 1,000 adventures had gone. So all 3 of which, the forestry colleagues, were armed only with a Beretta M34 per head, in the case of a hypothetical assault, entered the forest. Illuminated only by a dim halogen torch, and they noticed the traces of shoes scratched in the clay soil. They began to follow them until they reached a slope too steep to cover on foot. There was a mule track suitable only for off-road vehicles. They so decided to go back, but when they turned they heard branches and leaves breaking. They tried to understand where the sound was coming from without finding it. They started to run hurriedly, but something went wrong. The woman tripped on a large root and fell hurriedly, her head on a projecting stone, intending her head. At this point, all 3 were forced to stop. Both colleagues tried not to lose hopes of surviving and began to reason about what to do in a clear way. One would have gone back to get the off-road and the other would have taken care of the injured woman, so one had to go back with the torch, leaving the others in the dark. It was not the best of ideas, but at the moment it appeared to be the only chance. So the colleague set off, and luckily nothing happened to him, and he managed to reach the off-road. Once he got in and started the vehicle, his headlights illuminated a strange animal heading into the forest. He thinked of a boar, so he began to move the old off-road ATV in the direction from where it had come and where the others were. Once he arrived in the nearby where they were located, he found no one but a handkerchief soaked in blood, presumably from the woman's wound and some further traces not noticed before. The man, now alone, began to call his colleagues and the woman in a loud voice without having any results. He also used the research projector that the off-road drive owned precisely for cases like these, but nothing. Only traces in the ground that proceeded towards the steep slope. So, having only one chance of finding them, he decided to follow their tracks. He put the Forx-4 into lower first gear and very slowly began to go down the steep slope. Luckily, he succeeded in his intent, and it allowed him to discover further traces, but now there were also small skeletons belonging to some small animals. He had to stop when a large, dark and deep cave obstacled his continuing. He tried to use the searchlight in the direction of the opening in the rock without able to see anyone or the bottom of the wall. He decided to get out and go search on foot, since he couldn't continue with the off-road. Before entering, he began roughing in the box, looking for something useful for the situation and managing to find a harness, climbing ropes and a battery-powered transceiver, which would definitely be used in there. The following morning, a hunter on his Land Cruiser was passing through these parts and noticed a vehicle parked at the foot of the cave with its headlights still on, but almost completely discharged, and he got closer to try to find out what had happened. At the entrance of the cave, he saw that someone had lowered himself into the abyss under the ground with ropes, but looking down he saw nothing, so to see better in the dark spot, he took a torch and illuminate in that direction and saw the silhouette of man lying on the bottom. He called to him several times, but without having any response. So he decided to contact someone downward, but on the VF system he had on his vehicle to send reinforcements and a helicopter. Despite the timeliness of the rescue, the man was unfortunately recovered lifeless, the only survivor and witness of that terrible night. As regards the colleague and the young couple, nothing further known.